Good morning, everybody. What an honor to go after Madeleine Reese, and it was a perfect segue into my talk about the intersection between racism and militarism. Of late, I've been feeling quite somber when I read the newspaper headlines. This morning, I opened up one site, and the top 3 headlines were about 3 different instances of police violence, 3 different instances in which unarmed people have been killed by the police. So far this year, there have been 866 police killings, and that's just completely devastating and incomprehensible. But this morning, I also felt heartened by the fact that I would be coming to speak to a room full of peace activists, people who refuse to dispassionately read the headlines and do nothing. So thank you to the IPB, and thank you to my fellow activist, Phyllis Bennis of the Institute for Policy Studies, for thinking to invite the Dream Defenders, a Miami-based group of Black and brown youth that have been fighting against state violence, prisons, and police, that is in the leadership of the Movement for Black Lives, in which I'm representing today. I'm happy today to speak about the importance of understanding the role of race and structural racism in the context of growing militarism around the world. The images that you see projected behind me underscore that. When we see tanks and military equipment our government uses to secure and protect its dominance abroad turn up in our streets at home as we protest against racism and state violence, it becomes clear that we too only have rights so long as we don't challenge the status quo. In this way, the Black Lives Matter movement has been exposing the extent to which the state will contort itself to protect the power structure and the institutions designed to maintain its dominance. After the police killing of Mike Brown, an unarmed black 18-year-old in August of 2014, the community in Ferguson, Missouri exploded in protest. Imagine a densely populated neighborhood and a road running through it. And in the US, there are 2 yellow lines that separate the lanes going in the 2 different directions. That's where the police officer, Darren Wilson, had shot Mike Brown and left his body lying in the street for over 4 hours in 100 degrees Fahrenheit weather for everybody around who's living around there to see. It's no wonder that the community found this to be a grave insult and could do nothing but to get themselves out in the streets. So we were horrified as we watched tanks roll through the streets of Ferguson and police officers line up like soldiers as people marched in protest. Since then, this dynamic has been repeated over and over again, from Baltimore to Baton Rouge to Charlotte, making it feel like we're at war at home. Some of these cities even had the Israeli Defense Forces train them in the past, an eerie fact to consider as we increasingly compare the policing of Black communities with the Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands. And yet, sadly, we are not surprised. We've seen this dynamic in previous Black-led movements, and now is no exception. The government seems much more disposed to fortifying the police state to stamp out the resistance than to deal with the underlying demands of the movement to address structural racism in all of its manifestations: grossly unequal wealth, underinvestment in education and job training, poor access to health care and healthy food, inadequate housing, and a lack of even clean water in low-income Black and brown neighborhoods. Much like what some of you have called for in the past few days, the Vision for Black Lives policy platform calls for a divestment from military and police and an investment of those funds into a wide swath of social programs that would bring greater social and economic inequality, not just the legal equality that the civil rights movement of the 60s had secured. In this movement, we understand that US militarism and imperialism has consequences for both domestic and foreign policy. Domestically, our outsized spending on the military, over 50% of our discretionary budget, or almost $600 billion, deprives our people of much-needed investments in infrastructure, services, education, housing, and protecting our environment. Internationally, we practice a debilitating form of neocolonialism in the form of neoliberal policies and continue to protect the prevailing global economic order with force and backdoor support to questionable allies. We know that the burden of this ill-advised military spending and interventionism falls disproportionately on those most impacted by injustice and inequality. The cost of war, home and abroad, is most expensive to those who matter the least in our societies. As we throw billions of dollars at the war on terror and only create more insecurity for ourselves, we simultaneously spread Islamophobia and paranoia directed at our Muslim brothers and sisters. As we denigrate Mexican and other Latin American migrants coming into the US because of the neoliberal policies that we've forced on them have ravaged their home economies. We allow for immigration detention centers to warehouse immigrants and summarily deport them back to dangerous contexts. We see politicians taking advantage of this climate to spread more hatred and bigotry. Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered." If we're not already there, we are dangerously close to a world in which property and profit matter more than people. And as the Black Lives Matter movement in the US has underlined, some people matter less than others. In the face of unchecked state violence and systematic devaluing of Black life, Black Lives Matter has become a necessary refrain to highlight the extent to which anti-Black racism pervades our systems, institutions, and culture. As we watch videos time and again of police who have gunned down unarmed Black people in the streets and who have evaded any kind of punishment, Black Lives Matter is a desperate appeal for Black people to assert their humanity in a society that systematically denies it to them. The military-industrial complex and its cousin, the prison-industrial complex, are total manifestations of greed and extreme materialism, and the extreme materialism of which Dr. King spoke. A triumph of profit over the well-being of people, especially the people who our government treats as disposable, problem people whose issues it would rather bury than try to address. But I know that the Black Lives Matter movement, or the movement for Black Lives, following the Black feminist tradition, would also add to Dr. King's triplets. It's not just racism, capitalism, and imperialism that produce inequality and violations of human rights. It's heteropatriarchy too, and we heard about that in Ms. Ree's last presentation. If we are to think about who's most impacted by these interlocking systems of oppression, we must focus on the poor, Black women, transgender people, and immigrants who feel the brunt of discrimination at the intersections of their identities. It is thus through an intersectional lens that the movement for Black Lives elaborated its visionary platform. As stated in the preamble, there can be no liberation for all Black people if we do not center and fight those who have been marginalized. It is our hope that by working together to create and amplify a shared agenda, that we can continue to move towards a world in which the full humanity and dignity of all people is recognized. And so in the same way, we use the concept of intersectionality to understand the differences and privileges and oppressions in our struggles as complex individuals with different axes of identities. So for example, I am an educated woman of South Asian descent living in the US. We can use intersectionality to think about how we can bring our struggles together, how we can work collectively towards the aim of bringing peace, justice, and equality by fighting against oppression in all of its forms. When Ferguson erupted after the killing of Mike Brown and the police rolled out the tanks and tear gas in August of 2014, the Palestinian people, who were under siege at the same time in their own country, were among the first to express their solidarity, giving tips to activists on how to deal with tear gas exposure over Twitter. This outpouring of support expressed in the language of resistance helped set off an effort to build ties of solidarity with the Palestinian people through delegations, through commitments to participate in the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, through calling for a halt to the $3 billion that the US gives annually to Israel in spite of their brutal military occupation of Palestine. We want to continue to build solidarity with similarly situated international movements because we know that we will never achieve liberation in the US if we don't simultaneously fight for the liberation of others globally. The tentacles of capitalism and imperialism reach too far beyond our borders for us to think of this as a purely US-based movement. This is why it is an opportune time for the international peace movement to join with struggles against racism here in Europe, in the US, and around the world. In the context of mass migration and the influx of refugees, it is important that states be clear about how racism is manifesting and the institutions that prop it up. While I want to avoid sounding US-centric, it is undeniable that what is happening in the US is very important to the world. This moment of renewed activism and mass movement in the US has created an opening to challenge US hegemony by pointing to the militaristic and repressive ways in which the US is treating its own citizens' protest. As our trips to the UN in Geneva since Mike Brown's killing have shown, the US is increasingly self-conscious as other countries bear witness to the hypocrisy of the human rights record it boasts of on the world stage. Its disproportionate use of force on dissenters and failure to hold its actors accountable, all the while pressuring other states to do its bidding on the basis of their human rights records. The international peace movement should seize on this moment to reach out and bring other movements into the fold. It is time to galvanize all the people committed to fighting oppression to walk together under one banner. We're not going to win without this. Until we look around the room and see this room full of people, white, black, brown, young, old, LGBT, differently abled, people of all classes, nations, ethnicities, and gender identities, we're not going to be able to build the kind of movement we need to face up to the forces on the other side. I believe that we can come together, the people, and win a better, more equal and just society founded on a culture of peace and human rights. I believe that we will win.
Thank you very much. And it was also strong pictures behind you, but thank you very much. And the end was the best, that we believe that we win this battle. We are going to have a little bit tight timetable here. We have still one speaker yet.
I wanted to do something. Sorry.
Okay, you have a... Yeah.
I am here representing the Dream Defenders, which is a group of young activists, and so I can't end this talk without doing a chant. So would you all indulge me?
Okay.
Yes? Stand up. If you can, if everybody would stand up. It's okay, we've all done this before. So this chant is one that the Dream Defenders brought about when they had, when George Zimmerman, who was the person who had killed Trayvon Martin, was acquitted. They occupied the state capitol in Florida for 30 days, and 31 days and 30 nights. And they came up with this chant. So basically it's a call and response. So I'll say a word and you'll repeat it, and then that's it. So it goes like this. I believe that. I believe that we. I believe that we will. I believe that we will win. 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 Woo! Thank you for indulging me.
Thank you very much.